working on it. All right, so we've talked about the flow divider. Or not the flow divider. Boy, we should stop this and start over again. We've talked about the main servo unit and how it works. And hopefully you understand that there are 4 chambers. 2 of them make up the air metering force, 2 of them make up the fuel metering force, and you understand how to adjust the idle mixture and the idle speed. Tell me you don't know. Okay, and now we're going to move on. So unlike the pressure carburetor, even the float carburetor, which just injects or allows fuel to go right into the air, our fuel injection system then went from the servo through a large hose up to the flow divider. So we're talking about the flow divider up here. As soon as my computer decides it wants to play along.
I guess we have to go home.
You can go home. You know my rules. Just don't use that door. All right, flow divider. How are you going to feel when somebody calls me and says, well, what kind of student was he? I'm like, oh, he always wanted to go home early. Right, flow divider. What does it do? It receives fuel from the servo. First thing, because that's what it's got to do. What does it consist of? Well, if we look at the makeup of it, what is inside of the flow divider? It consists of a valve, a sleeve, which the valve runs in and out of, EEVE. It has a diaphragm, and it has a spring. And those are the major parts. It has 3 distinct purposes. And the purposes of the RSA flow divider are different than the Bendix flow divider. 1, most important, ensure, wow, I am just not doing well here. ENSUR, maybe I did do it. Ensure equal distribution fuel to each nozzle. What's that?
That's RSA, or you said the RSA was different?
Yes, so we're talking about the RSA though. So it's different than the Continental, which you have not talked about the Continental. We're still in the RSA system. So, all right, ensure equal distribution of fuel to each nozzle. How does it do that? It provides 6 equal passageways and hopes that it flows out the same to all 6. So there's a lot of hope going on there, but it does work. Provide clean shutdown. So it wants the fuel to shut off now. No dribbling out and letting the engine kind of, sputter and slowly work its way, die to death. It wants it to shut off right now, so clean shut off. And to regulate, or I should say to help regulate flow at lower speeds. Because what is the ultimate regulating force in this? What's the end regulating force? End restriction, I should say.
The nozzles.
The nozzles are. No. The nozzles are sized to accommodate proper fuel flow at max power. Therefore, the flow divider helps regulate flow at lower speeds. Yes.
Was that harder to do on regular engine carburetor?
Is it harder to do?
Yeah. So is it like an advantage of the fuel injection over carburetor?
The quick shut off?
No, the regulation of flow at lower speeds.
Not really. Continental doesn't, they don't worry about this. Their system's different, but just the way this particular one is, you're saying why is it a problem here and not versus something else? Because we have the pressure carburetor. Remember the discharge valve was under, had the spring in there, so it was like a pressure relief valve. So as the pressure dropped below, say 6 psi, it automatically shut off really quick. All right. With this one, if you didn't shut it off, and because it's very much like a pressure carburetor, and you still have some fuel hanging out inside the servo, and you have a spring holding the servo valve open, right? You have all of that, and so it just has a tendency to want to draw fuel back up and around and in, and keep running off and not turning off nice and clean. So you got to make sure that the distributor flow divider shuts off quickly. How does it do that? Let's see. It's 3 purposes. Let's see. It's 3 purposes. Those are its purposes. So the valve in the flow divider is spring-loaded to the closed position. Let's do it this way. Okay, so our flow divider. Spring loaded to the closed position. So here's the flow divider. So fuel is going to come up through this way. Can't get through. We have the spring up here that's pushing down. There's diaphragm in here, pushing this down, keeping it in the closed position. Not my favorite drawing here, but I like it because of this right here. Okay, so at idle, the V slot limits fuel to the nozzles. So what's going to happen as fuel comes in and tries to push this up, it's going to open up just a little bit. So if I only open it up to this part, I've got this much exposed. Well, there we go. So I've only got that much opening for a fuel. So you can see that right there, now I'm regulating it, right? I've got a smaller orifice. And so as the fuel pressure goes up, it's going to be, and remember, the servo works off fuel pressure, it's going to drive it up a little bit more and a little bit more until it finally gets all the way to the max fuel flow. And what then is the limiting orifice at that point? The nozzle. All right. So V slot limits fuel flow to the nozzles. As power is increased and flow increases, the V slot opens to a point where it no longer regulates fuel, and then what does? The nozzle.
I don't understand what that pyramid is supposed to be representing.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Okay. Let me erase some of my things. The pyramid is representing the orifice size up in here. And like I said, I don't love this drawing because you can't really look at this and say, oh, this part right here is this part right here. But because just a drawing doesn't work well for that. But what you have to just, if you can kind of ignore this a little bit, just think, okay, fuel comes up and it's going to lift up something that's going to lift up to this point and let this amount of fuel through. That's the orifice. Then it's going to lift up a little bit more and allow this much. So you'll have this much of an opening. Then it's going to come up and you have this much of an opening. So it just doesn't make sense when you're looking at it right here. It just looks like a little egg right there that's being smashed. And you're like, well, what am I supposed to do with this smashed egg? So, all right, does that make a little more sense? Okay, glad you asked. All right, so as power is increased and flow increases, the V slot opens to a point where it no longer is metering anything. And then what does the metering? The nozzle. Okay. Because nozzle pressure increases. Okay. And then we're going to talk about this a little bit after that. So I can write down that. Spring loaded to closed position. At idle. The V slot limits fuel flow. To the nozzles, and as power is increased, and flow increases, V slot opens, to a point where it no longer regulates and nozzle orifice controls flow. All right, so we talked about this a little bit more, but now we're going to talk about even more and really kind of digest this one. Because nozzle pressure increases in direct proportion to the flow, so in other words, as the pressure goes up, so does the flow in this case. So what we have is, here's our flow divider from the outside look, and each one of these little things right here is going to be where it's going to flow off to a cylinder, except one of them is going to be a pressure gauge. And the pressure gauge is going to look just like this. But the pressure gauge, well, that one actually says fuel pressure. What do you know? Because Beechcraft is smart. Is not really going to be a pressure gauge on most engines. It's going to be flow. So it's a pressure gauge just related to flow. But remember, not everything is going to be what it seems. So, so we have a pressure gauge that's actually labeled as a flow gauge. Everybody follow? So because it's assuming that as pressure goes up, flow goes up. And if everything works, as pressure goes up, what happens to the flow? It goes up too. All right, so as long as everything is working well, then everything works well. And when it doesn't work well, it doesn't work well. So we'll say because nozzle pressure increases in direct proportion to metered fuel flow. Because nozzle pressure increases in direct proportion to metered fuel flow, say as pressure increases, so does flow. A pressure gauge installed at the flow divider serves as a fuel flow gauge. All right. Now check this out. Not that. If one nozzle gets plugged, what's going to happen? You're right. Pressure does go up. What did the pilot just think happened?
Consuming more fuel.
You use more fuel. Did we use more fuel?
No.
Use less fuel. What did it tell the pilot?
Use more.
Pressure gauge went up. The pressure gauge doesn't say pressure. The pressure gauge says
Gallons per hour.
gallons per hour. So the pilot says, hey, my
Fuel consumption.
fuel consumption just went up, according to my gauge. So if one nozzle gets plugged, one cylinder, will run how? How will it run? Lean, okay. But here's a funny thing. The servo is working off pressure, right? So it's thinking, gotta have the right pressure. And it's gonna put the right, so it's working hard. And things are getting backed up a little bit, so your pressure gauge is gonna go up. So now you've got more pressure in the system. What does more pressure in the system mean to the other, we'll say it's a 4-cylinder, to the other 3 cylinders?
They get more fuel.
They're going to get more fuel. So one cylinder's got to run lean, and all others run what? Rich.
Is the flow directly proportional? It isn't directly proportional. Like the growth. With pressure,
Yeah.
it's directly 1 to 1.
Well, I figured that's where you're going. I don't think so. I don't know.
Because if you put a lot of pressure on a small orifice, it's going to come out faster.
Right. But to a point, it can't, right? To a point, it's,
That would mean it's not linear, though.
yeah, then it's not linear. Is that the question? Is it totally linear?
Yeah, because you said directly. Okay.
I don't think so. But remember, we're dealing with it in a very narrow range. For the most part. So, all right, this problem. So I'm thinking about your question. So will it manifest itself down at idle?
How does it on a gauge? Do they get farther and farther apart?
What get further and further apart?
Well, farther and farther than closer together on the pressure gauge.
It's only one pressure gauge.
Are the increments equal distance?
Oh, no, I don't think they are.
Okay, so it's not linear.
It's like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This one is. I don't think
Because it shouldn't work like that.
it is though.
That's actual pressure.
I know. Juan, in your airplane, is everything linear like this? Everything equal spaced? Because I don't think it is.
I get fuel flow.
Yeah, but your fuel flow, it's not equally spaced. They're closer together at one end than they are at the other, right?
You said digital bar.
Oh, I forgot. He's got a G. Never mind. Yeah, it's just a terrible picture. Not fuel flow gauge looks, unless that's the 2025. I don't think it is. I really don't think it's linear.
Isn't that completely misleading then?
Well, you might be missing the point.
Okay.
Problem, what is the problem going to look like? The problem will present as, oh, what do you think? Guys are,
HT will be different on the cylinders.
okay, so we'd have,
Higher CHT.
yep, one high CHT, or definite split. High fuel flow. Really though?
Reading.
Huh?
Reading.
Reading. High fuel flow reading. Do I really have a high fuel flow?
No.
Nope. What do I got? Rough running engine. Why is it going to run rough?
One cylinder's not.
There you go. One cylinder's not keeping up with the others.
And the others are so over ridge that it might be running rough because of that as well.
I don't know if we're really going to get into an over-rich, rough condition.
There's a lot of cylinders out. Like half of your cylinders out.
Yeah, which you're not going to get half. All right, so remember, because the fuel flow gauge isn't really a flow gauge, it's a pressure gauge reading in pounds per hour. So, rough running engine.
Pounds per.
Remember, the fuel flow. Actually, this is kind of the point B. I did them out of order because it's the order you gave me. The fuel flow gauge
So it's fine.
isn't, yes, it is your fault, isn't really a flow gauge. It is a pressure gauge. That is calibrated to read pounds per hour. Let's say at proper, well, so when everything's working correctly, at proper setup. So proper setup is not plug nozzles. And let's see, when servo is placed in ICO, which is what? All right, and how do I do that? Pull the mixture all the way back. What color is the mixture?
Red knob
Red. Where do I find red knob?
on your dashboard.
Dashboard. Yeah, no. Up there on the instrument panel or the throttle quadrants. So let's see, spring pressure. Closes the V-slot. And prevents the engine from sucking fuel out of the fuel lines. Because there's little 1/8-inch fuel lines running to every cylinder now.
Kevin, the black nozzles are purely function of contaminants, or
The black nozzles? What?
the black the nozzle is clogged, or is that contaminants, or?
Oh, what plugs them? Yeah. Now, there's two things that can get plugged on a nozzle. And really, the question I just asked you is, assumed you didn't know anything about the nozzles, and when there's just an orifice, and it's plugging the fuel orifice. But we're going to talk about fuel nozzles right now. But yes, you can get contaminants plugging the orifice. Hopefully, you have everything's filtered out because they had to run through the servo. But you could get something that plugs the nozzle going into it. But there's also going to be air bleeds coming from the outside that can get plugged, and so you have that problem too. So let's talk about those fuel nozzles. They are of the air bleed type. Both Continental and Lycoming, same thing. They're not interchangeable. They're a little different, but their function is exactly the same. There are two different types of nozzles, sort of, depending on how I'm going to look at it. If I look at, there's the plain nozzle and there's turbocharged nozzle. Then if I go the plain nozzle, there's two types of plain nozzles. So two types of plain nozzles, and then there's plain nozzles and turbocharged nozzles. So in the plain nozzles, there's, as you can see, the old style and then the newer two-piece style. And I'll show you a little video on cleaning them and stuff. But either way, they work the exact same way. So fuel goes this way. Fuel comes in this way, and it comes around and goes out towards the engine. But as it comes through, we can figure it's got like a little venturi action going on. So what it does is it draws fuel from under, there's a cap, and from under the cap, and there's one particular hole drilled into it. And so there's a little screen, and it comes into one particular little hole that has been drilled, mixes air with it for emulsification, all that stuff, same thing, and then off to the cylinder. So you can get the same problem here. Now, the thing you have to think about, though, is this goes directly into what?
Intake.
Okay, so I've heard directly into the cylinder. That's correct. It's screwed right into the cylinder. But what part of the cylinder or engine is right on the other side of this?
Intake port.
Intake port or
Valve.
intake or the manifold. Okay, so this right here is manifold pressure. On a normally aspirated engine, what is maximum manifold pressure?
Sea level.
2 inches or so below atmospheric.
Ambient.
Okay, it won't be ambient because of the venturi and curves and stuff are going to drop it down. So I say about 1 inch below. So 29.92, so we can say we get 30 inches of manifold. Probably going to see closer to about an inch loss at wide open. All right, so atmosphere is 29.92. What's best case scenario inside of the manifold?
28.92.
28.92. All right, so 29. All right, so that means that is this pressure higher or lower than the outside?
Lower.
Lower. Okay, so this is lower, and this is in fact continuously flowing, and so this area right here is lower than atmospheric, so that means it's going to do what to the air? It's going to suck it in without any problem. Now, if I've got a turbocharged engine, and it's ground boosted, and we'll talk more about that, but that means that the manifold pressure is equal to or greater than 30 inches. If this right here is 35 inches, and this is 30 inches, which way is it going to push the air?
Outside.
It's going to go out this way, and that's not going to work. So on a turbocharged engine, you actually have to put a little shroud around it and plumb this into the upper deck pressure, which is the turbocharged discharge pressure, so that this is higher than manifold, so it pushes the air into it. Follow? All right. So I guess this is a nice little drawing here. Fuel in. Air comes in the screen. There's one particular hole. And I'm stressing the point that there's one hole. It's not all the way around because that's going to make a difference in what we're doing. Let's see what else we have here.
Is it just air or air and fuel from the side?
Well, when it gets to right here, it's air and fuel. So just fuel here, just air here, fuel and air from there. That's the nozzle test. That's Hoppy's. That's Continental. All right, now you've seen everything. All right, so that's what the nozzle looks like in the drawing stage. So what can we say about fuel nozzles here now that we kind of understand them a little bit? Fuel nozzles, they're the air bleed type. And meaning air is mixed with fuel at the nozzle. Not combustion air, mind you. That's a whole other thing. That's the whole 12 parts of air is coming somewhere else. This is just little bleed air, or air bleed, I should say, so that we can emulsify the fuel. On normally aspirated engines, the MAP, what's MAP? Manifold absolute pressure is less than atmospheric. So air is drawn in. Into the screen / air bleed and mixes with fuel. Sometimes those air bleeds get blocked. I think it's more probable to see an air bleed block because it's just drawing in air from around the engine. So bird feathers and all that kind of stuff get in there. So an air bleed blockage on one nozzle would result in, what do you guys think?
Rich.
Ah, so one cylinder is going to run
Rich.
rich. Why is it going to run rich?
Because with the air bleed, you're putting a little bit of air in the fuel, and without that air, then you'll have more fuel, so it'll be rich.
So you're,
You just put that air in.
To an extent.
to an extent,
It won't
Mhm.
mix out all.
it won't mix as well. What else we got?
It won't burn as
Huh?
well. It won't burn as well.
Won't burn as well? No,
Yeah.
no, these are all really good thoughts. Kind of close, kind of dancing around it. Anybody else got something else going on here?
Hydraulic lock.
No, not hydraulic lock. Wow, we just went off the deep end right there.
Ready for that?
Way to go on that disappointment.
No, better call it after that.
All right. So on this side, we've got low manifold pressure. And what does it tend to suck in?
Anything
It's sucking in some air right here, right? And, well, what if I plug that up and it can't suck in air anymore? What's it going to want to suck?
fuel.
More fuel. But the you know, the flow divider,
The thing.
the distributor, why did you call it distributor? The flow divider is putting out its proper amount of fuel to run all of the cylinders. But one cylinder got a little blockage right here, and so it's saying,
Any more.
I'm going to suck more out of there. So what happens to the other ones?
Less.
They get less. So this one gets more. So it is going to run rich. The reason why it's going to run rich is because you have a low manifold pressure that instead of having fuel being pushed through the orifice, it's kind of like if we had a pipe or something, and a pipe, and Tim was going to run through the pipe and go through the pipe. Well, it's kind of an orifice. It's going to slow him down, but I'm going to grab his arms and pull him at the same time, right? So it speed him up. A little rope burn. So it's actually, so the fuel is pushing, and at the same time the manifold pressure is pulling. So that particular cylinder is going to rob more fuel out of its nozzle. The flow divider and the servo do not understand that, and they do not compensate for that and give the other ones the right amount. So all of the other ones are going to run lean. So an air bleed blockage on one nozzle would result in low manifold pressure sucking extra fuel, allowing that cylinder to run rich, and all others to run lean. What is my fuel flow gauge going to say?
Low pressure.
That,
No difference.
Not gonna change.
okay, so we got no difference,
Low pressure.
low pressure, or
High.
high pressure.
Gonna be lower pressure.
Ooh, you are correct. This is not, I always laugh at some of the stuff I write, but it works for us mechanics. I'm sure there's somebody in the physics department who's just cringing at everything I'm saying. Because it really isn't sucking, right? Because of the sucking action. Right, and we've talked about this. It's not really sucking. It's an absence of pressure, so it's really the force through. But if it helps you understand it, then I don't care. The fuel pressure will be lower. Indicating what?
Low GPH.
A low fuel flow. Even though flow is unchanged.
It doesn't depend on which meter in the fuel. So at full throttle, for example, that wouldn't be the case. It would be normal.
I don't think so. No. 'Cause you
the-
still have a
the-
blocked
the
nozzle.
is what's metering the fuel.
Right?
All four of the nozzles in a four-cylinder engine.
Yes.
So,
But it's still dependent upon the bleed coming through.
so is the pressure inside that system completely?
Is the pressure what?
Pressure is in that system, like, it's the pressure all throughout, not just at one point, at the one point.
Well, the servo is sending out the correct amount of fuel depending upon all of the nozzles being the correct orifice. Right? And
Yeah.
so, in effect, we've changed one of the orifices because the orifice is calibrated to a push through, if you will. But now, if you're pushing and pulling, the effective size of the orifice would be
With the V
larger.
slot. With the V slot.
Oh, V slot's out of the way.
Oh, that's completely
That-
irrelevant.
yeah, now it's gone. At wide open throttle, V slot's gone. But the V slot has no bearing on this. It's going to do the same thing. I would tend to think, that this problem would be even worse at lower RPM because the manifold split is so much different between inside and outside. That's what I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay. Low fuel flow indication. Poor idle. High idle cutoff rise. Poor idle cutoff, and because engine continues to some fuel. By the way, a lot of these things that I'm coming up with here, these aren't in your book, right?
So it should be also low temperature of the cylinder.
Should be a low temperature.
It's a small flow.
Could be, yeah, that could be too.
And other one should be higher temperature.
I like that. I like that. But are these in your book? Nobody's read the book, so you're like, I don't know, I never read the book. Well, a lot of this stuff comes from Lycoming troubleshooting guides, direct. It's around Puma stuff. So I compile a lot of information. So this is the stuff that I've actually dealt with in the field. And these are actually direct Lycoming troubleshooting techniques that I pick up. So when I get the publications, I implement it here. So it's not just me making this up. And let's see. That's a good place to stop, don't you think?